European energy security, next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus. I'm Robert Ricigliano, Director of the Institute of World Affairs at UWM. The recent cutoff of natural gas from Russia sent shockwaves through Europe's energy infrastructure. While the ostensible cause was a commercial dispute between Russia and Ukraine, Moscow's willingness to leave downstream customers in the cold has again raised fears about Russia's motives and the impact on the energy security of Europe. To help us explore the complex relationship between economics and politics in the region's energy environment, we're joined in the studio by Stephen Issacson, an institutional stockbroker with BC Ziegler Company who follows the energy sector. We're also joined by phone by Keith Smith, Senior Associate in the Energy and National Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. A retired diplomat, he held senior positions throughout Europe, including U.S. Ambassador to Lithuania. He has also served as Director of Policy for Europe and Senior Advisor for support of East European democracies. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Welcome to International Focus.
Thank you.
Ambassador Smith, I wanted to start with you, and I'm wondering if you could give us a little context to the current dispute, because if you listen to the parties, if Ukraine will say it's all Russia's fault, the Russian media, Prime Minister Putin will say it's all Ukraine's fault. Help us, give us a little background onto where does the cause of this dispute come from?
Well, it's hard to pin it on one thing. This goes back to the Soviet Union and the ties between Ukraine and Russia. But there are a lot of financial interests that go way back that are involved in this. Part of the problem in the energy trade between Russia and Ukraine, and Russia, and in fact most of Europe, is that a lot of this trade is very non-transparent. And there are a lot of murky groups and intermediaries that are involved in the trade. And some of these groups certainly are not representing the interests of their shareholders or of the consumer class in Europe. So a lot of this is a fight between oligarchs, Russian and Ukrainian oligarchs. But it also is this latest incidence of a cutoff, I think, is also related to Russian unhappiness with Ukraine's going alone and looking toward NATO and EU membership.
Give us a little bit of insight. You mentioned murky parties. I mean, a casual follower of these events would assume, hey, you have Russia sells, Ukraine buys, and then ships to other parties in Europe. But you're saying it's more than that. There are many others involved in this transaction?
Oh, yes. Remember that 80% of the natural gas that goes through Ukraine is not even Russian gas. It comes from, most of it from Turkmenistan. But Russia insists on controlling all of the gas that enters Ukraine, whether it's Turkmen gas, Kazakh gas, or gas from Russia. So Ukrainians are in a situation where they're actually the prisoners of Russian pipeline policy. And the Russians have insisted that there be an intermediary company between Russia and Ukraine that handles the shipment of all of the gas. This is a company called Ros-Ukrenergo. This company is one half owned by Gazprom, Russia's gas company, and allegedly one half owned by two Ukrainians. But it took a long time to find out the names of these people because it was very non-transparent. But the question is, why is there an intermediary? The present Prime Minister of Ukraine has said they want to get rid of the intermediary, but apparently there are interests, particularly in Russia, who do not want to get rid of the intermediary. Why do they want this group? They serve no obvious purpose except to keep the price of energy up, and they're making profits which nobody knows where they're going, quite frankly. As some of the shareholders in Gazprom, the foreign shareholders, have charged that Gazprom is voluntarily losing $1 billion a year in profit just by insisting that this firm be involved.
If we look at motives for what's propelling this, you have, one take on this. It's a price dispute with Ukraine. There's an economic interest there. others will look to the much broader sort of political as well as economic relationship between Russia, Eastern Europe, and the rest of Europe. How do you see the motives behind this? What's propelling this dispute?
Well, there's a lot of things. I think that, I mean, even in the Russian press, there's been speculation that President Putin, or now Prime Minister Putin, is a person who really has it in for President Yushchenko of Ukraine because of the Orange Revolution and because of his attempts to take Ukraine closer to the West. Now, how much of this is behind it, I don't know. The Ukrainians have paid a very low price for their natural gas. Part of this was done to keep the Ukrainians on a short leash because this way the Russians have insisted that the gas price be negotiated every year, and that way they can tie the gas price to what they consider the performance or non-performance of the Ukrainians in the political sphere. There's also a possibility that some of the gas in the past has been siphoned off, but at the same time I think it's worth remembering that all of the metering, or the quantifying of the gas going into Ukraine and out of Ukraine, has always been in the hands of the Russians, in Gazprom. And the Russian ambassador to Ukraine is the former CEO of Gazprom. So the Russians know exactly what's going on in the gas trade inside of Ukraine. When they suddenly declare that, oh my God, there's gas missing from the system, they can't be surprised, quite honestly.
In terms of its impact, what do people in Ukraine, in Eastern, Central Europe, are they taking away from this? What are countries in the rest of Western Europe taking away from this action by Russia?
Well, it can be kind of different. The people in Eastern Europe are worried that they're too dependent on Russian supplies. And there, in fact, some countries like the three Baltic states are 100% dependent on Russian supplies. And so they're desperate to try to find a way of finding alternative energy sources, because they don't want this 100% dependency. In Western Europe, on the other hand, you have big countries like France, Germany, and Italy, whose companies are interested in making money in the Russian oil and gas business, and they don't want to rock the boat. And those governments, in fact, are not interested in a unified energy policy in the European Union, whereas the smaller countries would like to see a unified policy which helps protect them from the monopoly forces of Russian oil and gas.
And are the countries like Germany and France and Italy and Spain, those that have these more direct dealings with Russia on energy, are they likely now to see that as a short-term policy or short-sighted policy and looking into investing in real diversifying or perhaps supporting a common energy policy?
They might. We have to wait and see. So far, there's no indication of that. There's going to be an energy conference at the EU later in the week, and I suspect there will be interest in all of those countries in trying to find more alternative energy sources. One of the things to keep in mind that while the Russians have shut off the gas for, over a week, this has cost Russia about $1 billion in revenue. And there's some people who are beginning to believe that one of the reasons the cutoff took place was that Russia didn't have enough gas to supply Europe at this time, and that in fact it was either a matter of cutting off the gas and supplying their own people with gas during a very cold January, or sending it on to Europe, and this provided a convenient excuse to cut off the gas and build up stocks at home. I don't know. There is a problem with Russian supplies. We do know that there hasn't been the investment in new gas fields in Russia that there should have been in order to keep the supply up. So Russia has had to monopolize all of the gas coming out of the Central Asian producers of Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan, and they've tried to buy 100% of it. Plus, they've tried to encourage, so to speak, the Azerbaijanis to send their gas to Russia instead of to the West. So they're trying to monopolize all of the gas because part of it they need it, and part of it is that they then tack on a huge profit, which when they sell it to the West Europeans. And the West Europeans, up to this point, have been content with paying these very, very high prices from because of the Russian middlemen. Now, with oil prices, world oil prices having dived down to less than half of what they were at the high point, gas prices will probably have to dip too, because there's usually a connection between oil and gas prices. So Russia's likely to get even less money from the West Europeans for their natural gas over the next year. So that's another factor that the Russians are looking at. So they're not in a great position on this, but the Ukrainians are not in a great position either. And both of them have done things which are, seem to be against their national interest. The Ukrainians could have, they have tremendous oil and gas resources, and they have methane gas, and they've got all kinds of resources they could use for energy, but they haven't done that. They haven't really encouraged Western investors to come into the energy business.
Ambassador Smith, we just have a few minutes left before our break, and I want to give you I want to ask you to comment on the implications of this for the foreign policy of a new Obama administration relative to Europe, relative to Russia.
I think for the new Obama administration, and my guess is that they have to take they have to continue the policies actually of the last administration in this respect, and be vigorously involved in Central Asia and trying to open up Central Asian sources to gas and oil to Europe. And the U.S. has been very active. In fact, at some points we've been more active than the Europeans themselves in trying to help supply Europe with oil and gas. But the Russian interest is they have an interest in trying to break the tie between the Europeans, West Europeans, or the European Union and the United States, and they want to replace Europe as the favored partner, and they're trying to use energy as a tool to do that.
And does this force a potential confrontation, a U.S.-Russian confrontation on outside of the energy sphere, but in the larger political sphere in both Europe and in the rest of the world?
No, I don't believe so. But it will. The Europeans are themselves going to have to take some hard choices. The U.S. is. We've been very active, actually, in dealing with the Azerbaijanis and the Kazakhs, and attempting with the Turkmen to get supplies of energy directly from those countries to Europe. But Russia has blocked that up to now, and I think it's up to the Europeans now to really pull up their socks and do that. And there is a conference in Budapest, Hungary, on the 26th, 27th of January to discuss a new pipeline alternative, a Nabucco pipeline, which would bring non-Russian gas into Europe. But the quantities are not large.
Ambassador Keith Smith, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, thank you very much for shedding lots of insight into this current dispute.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much. To our viewers, we'll be back in just a minute on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus. We're talking about the natural gas dispute between Ukraine and Russia that's been affecting Western Europe as well. Steve Issacson, I'm wondering if you can give us some of your reflections on what Ambassador Smith's analysis was of the current dispute.
Yeah, one of the things that I heard that I hadn't thought much about, and he makes a point, is that maybe Russia needs the natural gas. And that sort of takes us back to maybe what happened when the Soviet Union came apart. There's a theory that that the Soviet Union told the East Germans and other Warsaw Pact countries that they weren't going to be able to supply them with oil, and they had to find a way to get hard currency because oil is paid for in dollars. So is natural gas. And it's interesting that there may be a parallel here that we're seeing where Russia just is telling these people that, we just can't supply you. But the way the ambassador put it is that they just cut off the supply.
So they can build up their reserves? Or
right, exactly.
Now, is that concern more for its potential impact on Russia's relationship with its non-Russian consumers, Ukraine, Central Europeans, Western Europeans, or is it for its relations at home in terms of its supply to its own people? Well,
I think there's a whole lot of things going on that you have to sort of put into context. First of all, the Russian economy is in terrible shape. The Ukrainian economy is probably in worse shape because they are heavily dependent on natural gas to to fuel their exports, which are principally steel and heavy iron. Those industries are crashing as fast as you see going on in China. One of the things that kind of strikes me about the Ukraine is that their unemployment rate is very low, at least their published unemployment rate. But that would be the same thing that you saw in East Germany. Most of these industries are still state-controlled. They're inefficient. There certainly isn't any productivity that you could point to that is going to help them out. They're in the position where they have to start laying off or however they do that, which is going to create more problems in their internal society. The other thing that I think is interesting is that they are big debtors to Russia. Russia is now their bank. You're seeing a lot of parallels between what goes on with, nearly bankrupt companies in the Western economies. Here you have probably a bankrupt state. And they owe Russia a lot of money. They've had to go to the IMF to borrow, I think, $16 billion recently. Russia would like to operate their infrastructure. The Ukrainians won't give it up because Russia sees profit in the transit as well. There's a lot of this goes back to barter because there's a transit fee deducted from the gas shipments. That goes back to the whole Warsaw Pact when everything was barter. So we're still connected to that, and they need each other desperately, but they don't know how to disconnect. And as the ambassador points out, it appears that there are a lot of shady middlemen in the middle of this getting paid. At the end of the day, probably the Europeans, who have not many alternatives in the next 5 years, are going to have to pay up to support this.
We talked about that a little bit, and I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on the degree to which just straight corruption is taking a toll on, or being a drag on the economic relationship here.
Well, I think one of the clues you might have is the various political upheavals that they've had. Yushchenko came in. He was replaced, I think, in 2006 by more of a pro-Russian government. They regained power. His partner was Yulia Tymoshenko, who was the prime minister. She was the prime minister before. At some point, they fell out of favor with each other. Yushchenko fires her because I think she was conducting an investigation into these middlemen, these shady companies that Yushchenko may get, allegedly may be getting a piece of. And as soon as she was fired, the investigation stopped. Now she's back. It's all very interesting, and I'm sure that there are a lot of hands in this from both sides. And the people that suffer, obviously, are the people that need the natural gas.
With all these different players and agendas here, it's beginning to sound like an afternoon soap opera with the competing agendas that are going on here. And my head is still swimming a bit with so what's really the motive here? So is it a crass, serving the interests of those few middle people who are profiting from this trade? Is it about the big, non-economic political interests here? Is it about the economics of energy between Europe and Russia?
Well, there's, I think what the ambassador talked about the not so much love between the prime minister of Russia, Putin, and Yushchenko. I think it sort of goes back to that. I think the fact that Yushchenko is trying to bring Ukraine into the West, he's trying to come into NATO, he wants to be in the EU. He stood with Georgia during the dispute. That had to be pretty painful, I think, for the Russians to watch that. And I think the Russians are very, very concerned about NATO, about all of these countries around their periphery, joining NATO, which in effect ring them. I'm, thinking back to when Clinton was the president, and some of the people who were thoughtful in the press had begged him, don't let Poland into NATO because you're going to make the Russians nuts. Well, I think you have a lot of that going on here as well, and I think Ukraine makes them nuts.
You mentioned the economies in Russia and Ukraine, and
right.
you talked a little bit about the Ukrainian economy. I'm wondering if you could shed some more light on the overall Russian economy and the role of energy and energy exports in the general overall Russian economy.
Well, I think there's a couple of points here. Number one is that the natural gas contracts lag the oil business. The natural gas contracts are still relatively high, what they're receiving for natural gas compared to what they're getting for oil. Oil in the spot market is now down under $40 a barrel. I think I saw it at maybe $37, $38 a barrel today. I can't remember exactly, but it's moving down again. And obviously, they built their budget, a year or two ago based on $70 a barrel oil, and that was when oil was probably over 100. Right. And I think this has been very shocking. I think also if you take a look at what's happened to the ruble versus the dollar and their Russian stock market, both have crashed respectively. The same thing is true of the Ukrainian currency has crashed. Most of the European currencies have crashed against the dollar. And all of this stuff is paid for in dollars. One very good example, like in Ukraine, is that a lot of banks have been operating from Europe and Ukraine over the last few years, and they've been making mortgages, but they're based on dollars. And the repayments have to be in dollars, so the Ukrainians have to go in their own currency, convert it back to dollars to make their payments. Well, all of these loans throughout Ukraine are probably very similar. The Ukraine is, a tremendous debtor nation at this point to Russia, and the question is whether they're going to have to give up some of that transit infrastructure to satisfy some debts. It's no different than anywhere else where you have businesses squeezed. The Ukrainian is just a larger version of that.
Is this dispute, the shutoff of gas now, an attempt for Russia to hold on to the profitability, perhaps, of that part of their export income?
It probably has something to do with that. One of the telling things about Russia, though, you asked about the economy, is that I saw something recently where they were interviewing people on the street and they were asking about, how do you feel about your banks? How do you feel about your savings? And they say the average Russian doesn't deal with their banks. They try to buy dollars. They don't want to hold rubles. And again, pointing back to the fact that oil and gas are paid for in dollars and you have declining currencies has got to be a tremendous squeeze. And I think that's going to have a major effect on their energy policy going forward. So the fact that they're hoarding gas, perhaps maybe to hold for a higher price at some point, is an interesting theory.
Well, that leads into a question I have about again, putting this in the broader sort of global economic picture, at least domestically, when they talk about working their way out of the current financial crisis and the stimulus package, they're talking about the role of energy in that. It's as an opportunity to create jobs, but certainly as something that could, rising energy prices could certainly make this whole crisis much worse. To what extent does this conflict over natural gas in Europe suggest that the energy sector in Europe is potentially going to be an impediment to recovery from this crisis, at least in Europe and potentially in the United States?
In the context that where is Europe going to get its gas? Well, it's interesting. Europe is trying to disassociate itself, if it could, from this Russian situation. There's plenty of gas, I think, in North Africa. I think Algeria, Nigeria are really great potential sources. They have to figure out how to get a pipeline up there. One of the problems in the world today is just financing anything. I think that if interest rates are relatively low, but the ability to get credit is very, very difficult. And so how are you going to finance a giant pipeline to go around Russia? I don't think they could solve that in some years. So I think they're pretty captive to the situation. And I think that if they wind up having to pay exorbitant fees for their energy, which whether it comes from the price, being gouged by the transmitters and the producers, or the fact that the whole sector rises in terms of inflation, is going to have a major impact on the recovery of everybody.
We've got a couple minutes left, Stephen. I'm interested in your thoughts, your potential predictions about the impact of this in terms of the lasting impacts in terms of the global economy and the global energy trade.
I think that eventually that these prices will go back up again. I think that the bet is that a year from now we'll be looking at higher oil prices. The bet is that in 6 months or 7 months the economy will start to maybe expand a little bit again. I don't think anybody really knows that, but that's sort of the conventional wisdom that by the second half of the year that things are going to get better and that there will be more demand created. for products, and as that happens, then obviously the price of commodities will go up. I think that this is probably the one tax break that we've had so far to help our economy is low energy prices, and I think that if in fact we start to see inflation, which comes from all of the stimulus going on, and it'll be too few dollars chasing, and dollars again are key here, chasing too few goods, energy, that you'll see inflationary prices, and that would be a major problem for all of the world economies, including people like China.
And just a few seconds left, the relationship between the coming back of the manufacturing sector and energy is pretty critical in all this.
Yes, so absolutely, absolutely.
Steve Issacson from BC Ziegler, thank you very much for joining us again and for keeping such a close watch on the Russian economy and the energy sector.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, well, stay tuned. To our viewers, we'll see you next week on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,